I moved into apartment 2E, then discovered I wasn't me. Reddit drama story. They say you never truly know someone until the walls start talking. And in the case of my building, those walls had a mouth on every floor. It began the moment I moved into apartment 2E. The place was a steal, a top floor walk up with peeling floral wallpaper, creaking floorboards that echoed like bones snapping, and a balcony view of nothing in particular. I didn't ask questions when I signed the lease. Too desperate, too broke, and too emotionally exhausted to care. All I needed was a door I could lock behind me, a space to collapse in without the weight of judgment, a place where no one knew my name or the version of me I left behind. I thought that's what 2E was offering, anonymity. But anonymity has a way of drawing attention, especially in a place like that. The neighbors were unusually quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't just that they kept to themselves. They avoided eye contact, avoided noise, avoided me. I could feel their glances through the peepholes and cracked blinds, their judgments echoing through the walls, even when no words were spoken. That silence had a shape, a pressure behind it like a storm cloud that just wouldn't burst. The only person who ever acknowledged my presence was the old man from 20D, who nodded once when I passed him on the stairs and never again. I took it as a win. I tried to keep a low profile. No loud music, no guests, no drama. Just me, my books, and the occasional bottle of wine. But still, the building didn't let me forget I was an outsider. The pipes groaned like they were sick of my presence. The hallway light flickered only when I walked under it. My mail was constantly misplaced, though never the junk, always the important things. And then there were the notes, folded bits of paper slipped under my door at night, always unsigned. The first just said, "Careful." The next one, "She hears everything." Then, "Don't trust the locks." I thought it was a prank or some mentally unstable tenant trying to spook the new guy. But as the weeks dragged on, it stopped feeling like a prank and started to feel like a warning. One morning I came back from the corner store to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing stolen. Nothing moved. But the subtle displacement of my kitchen chair, angled just a few inches off, told me someone had been inside. I changed the locks, bought extra ones, got a camera. But the footage never showed anything. Just me leaving. Me returning, and sometimes at the edge of the frame, a flicker of movement that vanished when rewound. That's when I stopped sleeping properly. I'd lie awake, ears tuned to every tick and creak, every whisper of fabric brushing against the walls. I began to feel like I wasn't alone even when I was. Shadows started to linger too long. Mirrors gave me glances I didn't return, and there was always that feeling, like I was being watched, not by eyes, but by the building itself. The first time I heard it, really heard it, I thought it was a neighbor. A sobbing sound. A woman's voice, barely audible, weeping quietly from somewhere above. But I lived on the top floor. There was no one above. I chalked it up to plumbing, or my imagination, or both. But then it happened again and again, always at the same hour, 2:13 a.m. I started recording the sound with my phone, played it back the next day. Nothing. Just silence. Not even ambient noise. Like the building knew when it was being watched. Sleep deprived and unraveling, I began obsessively trying to trace the noise. I checked the attic locked. I spoke to the landlord. He brushed it off. I even tried talking to the woman in 3A, who looked at me like I'd just spit in her coffee and slammed the door without a word. It got worse when the letters changed. No longer warnings, now accusations. You let her in. You should never have opened the door. She lives in the silence. I didn't understand. I hadn't let anyone in. Not unless they had a key. Or unless the door hadn't been fully closed that one night. That night I thought it just blew open. That night the air had felt thicker. I told myself I was spiraling. That it was the stress, the insomnia, the alcohol. But then I found the handprint. On the inside of my bathroom mirror. Small, child-sized, and perfectly outlined in steam when I stepped out of the shower. I didn't even have to touch it. I just stood there, water dripping from my hair, eyes locked on the print, and felt the breath leave my body in one cold, startled exhale. That was the first time I left the apartment for more than a few hours. I packed a bag, went to a friend's couch across town. Slept like the dead. When I returned the next morning, I found my bag unpacked, my clothes folded and returned to drawers I never opened, my toothbrush used, the wine bottle I left sealed, now half empty, and worst of all, the camera I had set up in the living room. Gone. In its place, on the table, was another note, just 4 words this time. "She likes your things." That's when I started believing. Not in ghosts exactly, but in something. Something the building wasn't telling me. something no one wanted to admit. I began digging through records, found that the building had been around since the 1920s, survived a fire in the 40s, and was once a halfway house for orphaned girls. One of them, Eva Morel, had gone missing in 1951. Just disappeared. No leads, no witnesses. Just gone. Last seen in the hallway outside 2E. I thought it was a coincidence. I hoped it was. But the dreams started after that. Vivid ones. Always of a small girl standing at the end of my bed, soaked to the skin, hair matted to her face, pointing to the closet, and always waking up to find the closet door wide open, no matter how many times I locked it shut. I told myself to leave, over and over. But I didn't. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I didn't want to let it win. Or maybe part of me wanted to see what happened next. So I stopped locking the door. I left it wide open. I sat on the couch and waited, and that's when everything changed. Not slowly, not subtly, but all at once, like the building exhaled, like it had been waiting for me to stop resisting. That night, the lights didn't flicker. The air felt warm, welcoming. The pipes didn't groan. And the sobbing stopped. For the first time, it stopped. I slept, deep and dreamless. And when I woke up, everything felt fine, normal, peaceful, as if the apartment had accepted me, as if she had. That morning, I found one last note, tucked beneath my pillow. You belong to her now. And I smiled, because somehow I already knew. The days that followed were disturbingly calm, as though the storm had passed and left behind a silence too complete to trust. Apartment 2E, once a place of whispers and warnings, now welcomed me with warm morning light pooling on the hardwood and the comforting hum of an old radiator that used to sound like a dying animal. I went about my routine with a strange sense of clarity. I stopped checking the hallway for eyes peeking through door cracks. I stopped setting up cameras. I even stopped locking the door altogether, leaving it slightly ajar when I left, as though I expected someone, or something, to tend to it in my absence. And maybe I did, because things were different now. Better even. My packages stopped disappearing. My name was suddenly listed correctly on the mailbox. My rent payments, which were usually met with some bureaucratic headache, processed without issue. The landlord even smiled at me when we passed on the stairs, something I hadn't seen since I moved in. He asked how I was settling in, as if the weeks of chaos had been erased from his memory. I just told him everything was fine, and it was. For a while, but beneath that thin layer of peace, something festered. A gnawing unease I couldn't articulate, like the way you can't smell gas until it's too late. It started subtly. I'd wake up with dried mud on my feet, even though I hadn't left the apartment. My phone alarm would be off even though I'd set it the night before. The fridge sometimes had items I didn't buy. Things I'd never eat. Canned peaches. Liverwurst. A single half-smoked cigarette resting in the fruit drawer. At first, I thought I was sleepwalking, a side effect of stress finally catching up with me. But sleepwalking doesn't explain the voice memos. They began appearing on my phone without any action on my part. Short recordings, each exactly 13 seconds long. No identifiable sound, just ambient hum, like being inside a womb or deep underwater. On the fourth one, a voice whispered faintly near the end. A child's voice. I'm still cold. That was the first time in weeks I felt fear again, but it was dulled, like my mind had grown distant from itself. I couldn't cry, couldn't panic. I just sat on the couch, holding the phone, and whispered back, I know. Then came the journal. Not mine. I found it tucked behind the boiler in the hallway closet, bound in cracked leather, pages swollen with age and moisture. The first entry was dated 1950. The handwriting looped in elegant cursive, each word pressed into the paper with care. It belonged to Eva Morel. She wrote of the orphanage, of the other girls, of the woman who ran the place. A Miss Livia, described only in dread and implications. She doesn't walk, Eva wrote. She drags. Another page. She feeds on promises. Don't make her any. The final legible entry chilled me more than any whisper ever could. I gave her my voice to keep the others safe. But now she wants a body. She says mine is too small. She says I should find her another. The rest of the pages were blackened by fire, singed and illegible. I left the journal where I found it. I didn't want to know more, but it wanted me to. Over the following days, my dreams intensified. I no longer dreamed of the girl. Now I dreamed from her eyes. I'd wake up crying, gasping, sometimes screaming a name that wasn't mine. I'd claw at the bed until my nails tore. One morning, I found the words, Livia watches, scratched into the wooden bed frame. Another, I woke up to every picture in the apartment turned backward, facing the wall. Yet I didn't leave. I told myself it was just a phase that I'd push through. But deep down, I had accepted something. I wasn't the only one living there. and whatever shared space I'd entered, I had done so willingly. I began noticing shifts in the building itself. Neighbors started avoiding me more aggressively. I'd walk into the stairwell, and their doors would click shut. They stopped checking their mail when I was around. One afternoon, I found a dead bird on my doormat, its eyes still open. Later that day, another note appeared. "They blame you." I should have left then, packed whatever I could carry and never looked back. But there was something seductive in being chosen. The building of Olivia. Whatever collective consciousness ruled this place. I was no longer its guest. I was its tenant. Fully integrated. Then, on the 7th night, I saw her. Not in dreams, not in whispers, but standing at the end of the hallway where the light never quite reached. A little girl, wet, eyes dark, hollow like someone who had cried for decades and had nothing left. She didn't move, just watched. I blinked, and she was gone. But that night I dreamed from her again. Only this time I wasn't just watching. I was holding something. A rope, and on the other end, another girl struggling, screaming, until the noise stopped. I woke up screaming, "I'm sorry," into the darkness, soaked in sweat, hands blistered from gripping nothing. I became obsessed with finding answers. Search every online archive for Eva Morel, for Olivia, for anything. I found one newspaper clipping from 1952. Body discovered beneath floorboards of local orphanage, second missing girl confirmed dead. No suspect, no conviction, just the vague statement. The institution is no longer operational. Future use of the premises remains undecided. It didn't mention the building address, but the photo, it was this place. A younger version, yes, but unmistakable. The same iron railings, the same front steps. My building wasn't just built on trauma. It was baptized and I didn't leave. Not then. Instead, I did something even more dangerous. I invited someone in, just a friend from work, Carla. She had a natural curiosity, always trying to fix things, always wanting to believe in logic. I didn't tell her much, just that I was feeling off and needed company. She came. She stayed, and she noticed things immediately. Why is it so cold in here? Why are the mirrors covered? Did someone scratch this into your wall? I tried to play dumb, but she saw right through it. That night, she insisted we sleep with the lights on. She dozed on the couch while I paced the kitchen, and at 2:13 a.m. the sobbing started again. Carla jolted awake, clutching my arm. "Who the hell is that?" I didn't answer, just listened. It got louder. Closer, until it wasn't sobbing, was breathing. Heavy. Wet? Right behind the door, Carla stood up, terrified. Is this a prank? Then the doorknob turned slowly. I rushed to bolt it, but it never opened. The breathing stopped, and in its place, a whisper through the mail slot. Too late. Carla was gone before sunrise. She left a voicemail an hour later. I don't know what you're into, but that place isn't right. You need help. Don't call me again. I didn't. She moved to another state within the month. And then the notes changed again. She is pleased. The trade was fair, Ba. You've bought yourself time. I didn't understand. A trade. What did I give her? But in my gut, I knew. Carla. She came in, and I let her. Maybe that's all it takes. I didn't hear from her again. Her number went dead. Her email bounced. Her social media wiped. As if she'd been absorbed. Forgotten even by the world beyond. Like she never existed. But I remembered. I remembered everything. And that became the problem. Because remembering made me useful. Remembering kept me connected. The building wanted more. I began seeing people linger too long outside the front entrance. A woman with a stroller who'd stand and stare for minutes. A man who circled the block 3 times before disappearing into the alley. I knew what the building was doing. It was choosing again. And it was using me to help. That's when I stopped sleeping altogether. My job faded. Friends faded. I stopped answering calls. My world became the apartment. My role became its steward. Because if I didn't choose someone, she would choose me. Again. And I didn't think I'd survive a second time. So I started watching. Waiting. Listening for the next knock on the door. Because it always came eventually. And when it did, I knew. I'd open it this time. Not to let them in. But to let her out. The knock came 2 nights later, faint and uncertain, like a child unsure if they were welcome. I was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed with a mug of tea long gone cold in my hands, staring at the door as if I'd known the exact moment it would come. My apartment was unnaturally quiet, even by its usual haunted standards. No radiator groan, no creaks overhead, not even the distant sound of traffic outside the window. Just the echo of that soft knock, and the feeling that something was holding its breath on the other side. I rose slowly, mug trembling slightly as I set it down, and walked barefoot across the floor that had long ago stopped protesting under my weight. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel into another reality, and the door, still warped and chipped from decades of use, stood half in shadow. I didn't ask who it was. That wasn't important anymore. I opened it. She was standing there. Not Eva, not Livia, a new face, young, maybe early 20s, pale, dark-haired, dressed in a rain-soaked hoodie despite the dry night. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed red like she'd been crying for hours or maybe years. She said, voice barely audible. My phone died. I think I'm lost. She held it out like proof, a cracked iPhone screen blinking low battery. I was supposed to meet someone in this building, but now I'm not sure if I got the right address. I nodded like I believed her, like any part of this wasn't exactly what was supposed to happen. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the inside of the apartment with a calm I didn't recognize as my own. "Come in," I said, voice hollow. "You can charge it here." She hesitated only a second, long enough for the building to notice, and then stepped inside. The door closed behind her without me touching it. I could feel the air change again, like the walls had shifted to make space for her. I watched her eyes scan the room, the books on the floor, the covered mirrors, the lack of photos, the door that led to the closet I never opened anymore. "You live here alone?" she asked, plugging her phone into the cord I had already coiled neatly on the table, like I'd been expecting her. "Yeah," I replied. "For a while now." She looked uncomfortable, and I knew it wasn't just the musty air or the dim lighting. It was the sense of being observed. The building liked to get close to newcomers. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I didn't offer food, didn't ask questions, just waited. She checked her phone twice, tapping at the screen with increasing frustration. "No signal," she muttered. "That's normal?" I said, not bothering to hide it anymore. "This place it doesn't like interference." She gave me a sharp look, like maybe I was joking, but I didn't smile. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway leading to the bathroom. "Is it okay if I use the—" "Of course," I interrupted, already standing. "It's just down there. First door on the left." I didn't follow her. I didn't have to. As soon as she disappeared around the corner, the apartment inhaled. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and ash. My teacup cracked where it sat, splitting along the rim like it had been struck by a blade of sound. I sat back down and waited. I didn't have to do anything more. She had stepped over the threshold willingly. That was all it required now. And yet, part of me still watched the clock. 2:13 a.m. It always came back to that moment. The minute when the past and present folded into one, when the boundary between stories collapsed and chose a new narrator. That was when I heard her scream. It was short. Just one sharp, panicked cry that cut off like a power outage. Then silence again. I didn't move. I just listened. The hum began again, that low, vibrating frequency I used to mistake for the fridge or bad wiring, but which I now knew was the sound of the building speaking. After a few minutes, the girl returned, but it wasn't her anymore. Her eyes were different, too still, too clear. She smiled politely, as if nothing had happened. "Thanks," she said. "I should go." I nodded, not looking her in the eye. "Of course." I watched as she walked to the door, pulled it open, and paused. She turned her head slowly back to me. She said thank you, she whispered. "She's happy again." And then she left. That's how it works. Someone comes in, someone is taken, and someone is allowed to remain. For now, it doesn't always happen the same way. Sometimes they stay longer. Sometimes they never leave. I've learned to read the signs. The way the windows reflect wrong, the sudden warmth in the floorboards, the moment when your own voice echoes too late back to you. The building is always searching, always testing, and I'm part of it now. Not in chains. Not in blood. But in purpose. They come to me now. Not often. Not every night. But enough that I don't have to go out anymore. Enough that the building is satisfied with me. I hear the footsteps in the hall. People looking for something. A place to crash, a friend's address, a shortcut they were sure was here last week. They knock. I let them in. I give them tea, offer them warmth, and wait for the moment when the lights flicker just once and I know the handoff is complete. Some leave. Some don't, but none of them ever remember what really happened. And that's the beauty of it. Memory is the first thing she takes. I tried to write it all down once, to tell someone, to confess. I filled an entire notebook with dates, names, faces. Every visitor, every dream, every note I ever received. I left it on the kitchen counter, planning to take it to a priest or a reporter or anyone who would listen. But the next morning it was blank. Every page wiped clean. Only one line remained, written in the same handwriting as those early notes. She writes the story now. And so I stopped trying, because resistance doesn't break the cycle. It feeds it. The more you fight, the more it pulls. I've seen others try to leave the building. Some run screaming down the stairs. Some check into hotels and never come back for their things. But it always finds them again. The story finds them. I once saw a woman slam her door shut and tape it with crucifixes and pages from the Bible. She lasted 3 nights before her door was found swinging wide open and her apartment empty. No signs of struggle. No explanation. Just a single candle still burning, dripping wax onto an open palm print on the floor. The only way to stay safe is to obey, to become part of the rhythm. Feed it. Let it breathe through you. And in return, it gives you protection, a kind of purpose, even admiration in its own dark way. There's a reason my rent never goes up. Why my mail always finds me. Why the landlord never questions the smell or the stains that appear and vanish within hours. I'm not a tenant anymore. I'm a custodian, a vessel, a witness. Last night I heard something new. A child's laugh. High, broken, echoing from the closet I haven't dared open in weeks. I walked to the door, placed my hand on the handle, and waited. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I knew what it meant. The girl I let in, the one with the dead phone and the nervous smile, she had lasted longer than most. She had given something of herself willingly. And now she wanted to say hello. Not Liviva. Not someone else. A new page. A new voice. I didn't open the door. Not yet. But I knew I would. Eventually. When the time is right. Because that's what stories do. They evolve. They change narrators. They pass from hand to hand, like old letters or cursed keys. And all the while, the house listens. The walls memorize. The floor remembers your weight. And the air. Oh, the air. Carries every secret like perfume. I'm not scared anymore. Not like I used to be. Fear is for the ones who still believe they can leave. I know better. I live here now. We live here. And the next time someone knocks, I'll be ready. Not to help. Not to warn. But to welcome them home. They always come in waves. After one leaves. Or disappears or transforms, depending on what the building decides. They stop for a while. As if the place is digesting, reflecting, quietly rearranging itself for the next chapter. Those quiet stretches are the most dangerous, not for what they contain, but for the illusion they create. Peace. Normalcy. You begin to think it's over. That maybe you've served your purpose and can be let go. That maybe you were just part of a temporary act, a background character in someone else's haunting. But the truth is worse, the building never lets you go. It just learns to wear your skin more convincingly. After the girl with the broken phone, 2 weeks passed. Not a sound in the walls, not a whisper under the door. I started walking barefoot again, daring to open the windows and breathe in real air. I made toast one morning and actually tasted the butter. I thought, for a brief and stupid second, that I had earned something, that she was rewarding me. But you don't get rewards here, you get trials, and the longer she's silent, the harder the test that follows. It started small, like it always does. I noticed a photo on my bookshelf, one I had never taken. A Polaroid of me, sitting at the kitchen table asleep, head resting on my arm. I was alone in the frame, or so I thought. When I looked closer, I saw something reflected in the window behind me. A figure. Thin, translucent, face turned toward the camera. Watching. I threw the photo in the trash, but the next morning it was on my pillow. That was the first sign. Then came the music. A tune played faintly in the night, something that sounded like a music box dragged underwater. It repeated every night at 3:09 a.m., not 2:13 anymore. Something had changed, a new time, a new rule. I tried recording it. Nothing. Just silence. But I could hear it clear as breath, every note seeping through the vents. And I wasn't the only one. One evening I heard footsteps outside my door. Fast, agitated. I opened it a crack and saw the man from 2D, the same old man who once nodded at me and never again. He was standing outside his own apartment, trembling, holding his hands to his ears. Make it stop. He whispered, not to me but to the hallway itself. Please, just make it stop. I didn't say anything. I closed my door and locked it out of habit, even though locks didn't mean anything anymore. The next morning, his door was wide open. His apartment was empty, completely. Not just his body, his furniture, clothes, toothbrush. All of it gone, as if he'd never lived there at all. The number plate beside the door, 2D, was missing too. In its place was a blank, yellowing rectangle of paint. I looked through the peephole that night just to see if the building would acknowledge it. I watched the hallway flicker with that strange, uneven light. I waited, and then at exactly 3:09, I heard the music again and saw a child's hand reach up and smear something across the peephole from the other side. A dark, grazy print. When I opened the door, there was nothing. Just silence. The kind that presses in on your chest and listens to your heartbeat like it's choosing a tempo. It was clear then the building had moved into a new phase. This wasn't just about inviting people in anymore. It was changing the script, introducing new characters, new roles. I began finding names in strange places, written in dust on the windowsill, scratched into the inside of the toilet tank, carved beneath the kitchen table I never ate at. Names I didn't know, but that made my spine curl when I read them aloud. I started writing them down, listing them in a notebook I kept hidden in the freezer. I didn't know why that felt safe. It just did. By the end of the week, I had 42 names. Then, on the 8th night, someone knocked again. This time it was different. I didn't feel dread. I felt expectation, like I was late for something. I opened the door and saw a boy, maybe 16, 17, gaunt, pale, eyes sunken in the way that only comes from seeing things you can't explain and never forget. He said nothing. Just held up a sheet of paper with a name written in thick black marker, Jacob Marel. The surname hit me like a nail in the chest. Merrill, Ivas. I stepped back, and the boy walked past me like he already lived here. He didn't even look around. He went straight to the closet, the one I had kept sealed for weeks, the one where I'd heard the child's laugh. He placed his hand on the knob and whispered something too soft to hear. The door opened on its own. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. I watched as he stepped inside and shut the door behind him. A second passed, then a minute, then 5. I opened the door again. The closet was empty, but the inside had changed. The walls were covered in writing, thousands of names, hundreds of Morels, covering every surface, pulsing faintly like they'd been written in blood and never dried. At the center, in larger, messier strokes, was one phrase, Ace, Aishi Kme back K Karao Gumi. I slammed the door and pushed a chair in front of it. But it didn't matter. Nothing holds in this place. I went to bed without brushing my teeth, without turning off the light. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I didn't want to. But somehow I must have, because I woke up in the hallway. Not outside my apartment. Inside the building's bones. A narrow corridor of decaying wallpaper, lined with doors that had no handles, only eye holes. The carpet squished with every step. I wasn't wearing shoes or socks, just my sleep clothes. I turned, tried to retrace my path, but the hallway extended in both directions now. No windows, no landmarks. Only then, from one of the eye holes, an eye opened. Bloodshot. Human, it blinked at me. Then the next one opened. And the next. All of them watching me from behind glass. Faces I couldn't see. Only eyes judging. Selecting. I ran. No direction. Just away. But the hallway never changed. I passed the same door with the number 2E carved crudely into it 4 times. Each time the eye inside was different. Younger, older, familiar. Eventually the carpet gave way and I fell. Not far, just into another space. A room. Apartment 2E. But wrong. Upside down. The bed on the ceiling. The window on the floor. And the walls bleeding water. In the center stood a girl. Eva. Not the soaked child from my dreams, but older now. Maybe 20. Her skin pale and stretched as if she'd outgrown her body. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, my voice came out. "You're the last page," she said. "Write it carefully." I woke up screaming. Real this time. In my bed, fully clothed. The room was right side up. The light was off. The air was warm. I cried. For the first time in months. Not because I was scared, but because I finally understood. I wasn't just a witness. I wasn't just a vessel. I was the pen, the one writing the names, cataloging the lives that passed through this place. The building doesn't just take people. It remembers them. Through me, I opened the freezer, pulled out the notebook. Every name now glowed faintly on the page, as if etched in starlight. New names had appeared. Jacob, Carla, the old man from 20D, even the landlord. I hadn't written those, but they were then. At the bottom, in letters too fresh to be old, was my own name. It was the only one not glowing. I stared at it for a long time, heart stilling in my chest. What did it mean? Was I next? Or was I diffolder? A finale. That night, I didn't open the door when the knock came, but I could feel her disappointment in the walls. I could smell it, like burnt sugar and rot. A warning. A request. And the next morning the closet was open again. Inside was a mirror, one I hadn't seen before. Its glass was cracked in the center, as if something had tried to escape from behind it. Written across it, in condensation that shouldn't have existed, were 3 words. Tell the ending. And so now I wait. Not for them, but for her. The air in 2E had changed again. It no longer held the suffocating stillness of something waiting. It pulsed now, like lungs beneath floorboards, like a breath that mind filling the apartment over and over. The walls were closer than before. Or maybe I was bigger, swollen with something that didn't belong inside me. I stopped leaving. The outside world had already let go of me long ago. No calls, no messages, no knocks from neighbors asking to borrow sugar or silence. Even the landlord stopped showing up to collect rent. But the rent was still paid. Somehow, my bank account showed the deductions every month, but I hadn't worked in weeks. Maybe months. I couldn't tell anymore. Time inside this place was bending in slow spirals, stretching and folding like skin. I only measured days now by the knock, and the knock came every night. Sometimes I opened it. Sometimes I didn't. But it made no difference. If the building wanted someone, it took them. I'd wake up to see a stranger asleep on my couch or find a coffee mug in the sink I'd never touched. Once, I found a child's drawing on the fridge, a crayon sketch of a tall figure with no face standing beside a smaller one holding its hand. They were labeled Men and Mother. I stared at it for an hour, then burned it in the sink. The smoke smelled like pine and blood. After the mirror appeared in the closet, I stopped going near it. I covered it with a sheet, nailed the door shut, stacked furniture in front of it. But the next morning, the sheet was gone. The nails, pulled out clean, the furniture, reorganized neatly back in place, as if by a polite intruder, and the mirror remained. Each day it reflected less and less of me. First my face blurred, then my hands vanished. By the fourth day, my reflection showed only the apartment, but without me in it. And in the bottom right corner of the mirror, in fading silver script, the words shifted slightly each time I dared look.
Huh?
She sees through you. You were always her story. You borrowed her name. I didn't understand. Or maybe I did and was too afraid to admit it. Because somewhere deep inside, something was unraveling. I began hearing memories that weren't mine. Lullabies in languages I never spoke. Laughter that cracked like glass. I felt the sorrow of a child left in a room too long. The fury of a woman betrayed by a house that was supposed to protect her. The hunger of something ancient. Something that had not been born but assembled. It used to be that I only dreamed of Eva, but now I remembered her. I remembered being her. A girl clutching a rag doll with a cracked porcelain head, a voice whispering promises through a keyhole, the slow suffocation of innocence traded for safety. And always that name, Livia. I started reading again, scouring the journal I had hidden beneath the floorboards. Pages that had once been burned now restored, somehow. Each entry was clearer now, the ink bolder. Eva had written it all. Her hopes, her fears, her pact. I was no longer reading about her. I was remembering her hand moving across the page. The last entry chilled me to the bone, even though I had already lived it. She said I'd forget myself. That one day I'd be the one opening the door. That I'd become the story others entered. But I left her something, a piece too sharp to swallow. I didn't know what it meant. Not then. But I would, soon. That night, I was woken not by the knock but by silence so deep it made my ears ring. The building wasn't breathing anymore. It was listening. I turned my head toward the closet, expecting to see the mirror still covered. But it wasn't. The sheet was gone. The mirror was uncovered and pulsing with a dim silver light. I stood against every instinct and approached. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Somehow, I was excited, like I was finally about to understand. In the mirror, I saw her. Not Eva, not Livia. Me, but not the version of me that lived in this apartment. The real me. The before me. I was smiling. I looked healthy, whole. I was standing outside the building, a suitcase in hand. It was the day I moved in, but in the reflection, I paused, looked up, and then smiled wider. As if I recognized the building, as if I'd been there before. The me in the mirror nodded at me and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I read her lips clearly. You were never lost, you were returning. The mirror cracked down the center, and the apartment screamed. Not aloud. Through every wall, every pipe, every grain of wood. A scream made of pressure and memory and grief. I fell to my knees as the air thickened into shadow, coalescing into a form near the door. A shape. Not Livia. Not Eva. Something worse. A hybrid of all who ever passed through. The silhouette of many voices. And it moved toward me without steps, just a slow folding of space. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't run. I was inside a moment older than time, being rewritten, repurposed. And then she stopped, right in front of me. She reached out and touched my chest, and I remembered. Everything. I wasn't the first tenant in 20E. I wasn't the latest chapter. I was the preface. The seed. The original. I was Elo. Or rather, I was what she became. When the pact was made, when Livia gave me the key not to escape but to replace her, I hadn't escaped the building. I became it. I became the new anchor. The new host, the voice behind the door. And all this time, I'd been dreaming I was someone else. A man. A victim. A Vic, none of that was real. That life was borrowed, a mask crafted from memory fragments and guilt. The building had let me believe the story was linear. But the truth was more complex. It wasn't haunted. It was the haunting. It replicated itself through its tenants, passing on roles like inheritance, caretaker, witness, vessel. And now, after all these years, it had come full circle. I was back at the beginning. But this time, I wasn't helpless. This time I knew. I stood up. The shadow figure melted into the floor, retreating like a tide. The air cleared. The mirror returned to glass. I walked to the front door, not with fear, but with purpose. I knew what I had to do. Across the hall, apartment 2F, the one always locked, always silent, had a light on. I'd never seen it open, not once. But tonight, it was calling. I stepped into the hallway barefoot, feeling the floor flex slightly beneath me like skin. I walked to the door. It opened before I touched it. Inside was a room untouched by time. Faded wallpaper, a wooden crib, a rocking chair still in motion, and on the floor a single page torn from my journal. To end the story, one must become the reader again. I stepped forward. The door shut behind me. The crib was empty, but not cold. Something had just been here. Something waiting to be named. I understood then. She wasn't a ghost. She was a cycle, and I wasn't the final chapter. I was the reset, the moment everything begins again. And all I had to do now was open the door. It was quiet in apartment 20F. Not the deceptive silence I'd grown used to in 2E, but something deeper, something ancient. The walls here didn't breathe. They listened. The air didn't move. It waited. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering bulb above the rocking chair that never truly stopped rocking. The floor beneath me was softer than it should have been, like carpet soaked through with old water, or maybe memory. And the crib, though empty, emanated a warmth that felt misplaced. I didn't belong here. Not physically. But this place recognized me all the same. The torn page at my feet fluttered once, then lay still. I picked it up. Its edges were frayed like something had chewed at them. The ink shimmered faintly in the half-light. To end the story, one must become the reader again. I stared at it, mind unraveling in all directions. If I was the author, the pen, the vessel. What did it mean to become the reader? To surrender control? To forget? Or to remember everything? Behind me, the door clicked shut. I didn't flinch. The building wasn't threatening me anymore. It was guiding me, returning me, preparing me for the truth it had always known I wasn't ready to see. The mirror in 20E, the dreams, the shifting roles, they were never warnings. They were invitations. And I had RSVP'd long ago. There was something under the crib. I knelt and reached for it, fingers brushing cold metal, a key. Brass, tarnished with age, teeth worn smooth. But not just any key. The original. The first. The one that had opened the door to Iva's room in the orphanage all those years ago. The one Livia had given her. Not to escape, but to bind her to the building forever. And I had taken it. I had used it. I had become it. The moment I touched the key, the world shifted. Not a tremble or quake. Just an invisible pivot, like a book falling closed. The air thickened, not in weight but in awareness. The crib vanished. The walls melted into paper. The ceiling dissolved into a starless void. I stood alone in a space made entirely of pages, thousands of them. Floating, whispering, turning themselves. Each page had a name, a date, a room, a voice. They formed a spiral around me, endless and turning, and at the center of the spiral stood a chair. Not the rocking one. This one was upright, wooden, ancient. A writing desk materialized in front of it, bearing a single blank sheet of paper and a quill resting on an inkwell that seemed to pulse with red instead of black. I walked toward it with no hesitation. I knew what was expected. The key turned to ash in my hand. The pages around me slowed. The whispers hushed. I sat in the chair and picked up the quill. The ink trembled, thick and alive, climbing the tip like it had been starving. And then I wrote. Not words. Not a story, just a name. Mine. It didn't matter which one. I wrote the name I remembered. The one before Eva, before the building, before the forgetting. And as soon as I finished the final letter, the ink bled outward, soaking the paper, consuming it. The chair splintered beneath me, and the pages burst into flame without heat or smoke. The void folded inward, not collapsing but closing, like the end of a final chapter you know you'll never read again. Suddenly I was awake, not in 20F, not even in 2E, but in a hospital room, white walls, fluorescent lights, beeping monitors. I was in a bed, IV in my arm, heart racing. A nurse rushed in, startled to see my eyes open. "You're awake," she said, blinking in disbelief. "You've been unconscious for almost 6 weeks. We didn't know if." I didn't hear the rest. Because something else caught my attention. On the nightstand beside me, among flowers and cards I didn't recognize, sat a folded note. I picked it up with trembling hands, no signature, just 4 words. The door is open, Dawn. I stared at it, heart climbing into my throat. The nurse called in a doctor. People surrounded me. They asked questions. Do I remember my name? Do I know what year it is? Do I know where I am? I answered everything correctly. Except for one thing. I didn't tell them I remembered everything. The building, mirror, the crib, the key, because I understood now what the final part of the story truly was. Not escape, not resolution, not even peace. It was migration. The haunting didn't end in that apartment. It didn't burn or vanish. It moved. It shed its walls and bricks and rewrote itself as a person, as me. The building lives inside now. It no longer needs creaky floorboards or leaky pipes to whisper. It can whisper through me, see through me, invite through me. And it already has. 3 days after I was discharged, I returned to my old life, if you could call it that. My name was in the system, but my apartment no longer existed. There is no 2E, the landlord said, confused, flipping through paperwork. The numbers jumped from 2D to 20F. Been that way for years. I smiled. Of course they had. I didn't argue. I found a hotel, started applying for jobs, pretended to be someone new. But every night at 2B13 AM I hear her, not crying anymore, calling. She's looking for a new home, and I've learned how to find them. The quiet buildings, the ones with old wiring and soft wallpaper, the ones where the mirrors face doors and the lights flicker just enough to be ignored. I move in. I leave the door unlocked, and eventually someone knocks. They always knock. Sometimes it's a lonely traveler, sometimes a curious child, sometimes a friend looking for a couch to crash on. And when they ask, "Do you mind if I come in?" I say yes, because the key was always under the mat, and the story was always waiting to be told again, this time by you. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.